Welcome to the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast, powered by PMA. I am your host, Dean Phillips. And today with me, of course, I am fortunate enough to have with me Caitlin Sickles, who is from the Bracewell group, where she is the senior principal. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's great to have you here today. Tell us right off the bat, what do you see as your big takeaway as we look forward to the future here?
Absolutely. So I'm thrilled to be on. I am a longtime listener and am really enthusiastic about the partnership that you have with PMA. So I'm happy to share a takeaway. Let me say that the policy resolution group at Bracewell, we work closely with PMA on federal advocacy. So it's us here at PRG and the team over at the Franklin Partnership. And so listeners will be unsurprised to know my takeaway is in the advocacy space. And, you know, we do a survey of members every year, PMA and NTMA members together under the banner of One Voice for Manufacturing. And consistently, members say that advocacy is a top benefit for them. And I think that makes sense because what we also see is members and manufacturers in general concerned about what government action means for them. Listeners will not be surprised to hear that the government isn't functioning in a great way right now. We have a really unprecedented polarization in government. We have a lot of brinksmanship between the two parties. Of course, that plays out in a way that makes legislation sometimes very difficult to move forward. And what we see when we see legislation having a hard time moving forward is a willingness, and we see it in both parties right now, to take action through regulation. And regulation can be challenging for companies because it introduces an element of uncertainty. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, how a policy change may come in that impacts the way that you do business, or impacts the way that your workforce is able to get their work done. Regulation can certainly be good for business. It can be positive. It can also be challenging for business, but it introduces a level of unpredictability that makes work challenging sometimes for manufacturers. And so my big takeaway is that I anticipate that there is going to be increasing government interest in and interaction with the manufacturing sector. I think that for a number of reasons. I think there's a lot of interest in energy and environment issues. There's a lot of interest in workforce issues, particularly with the rise of automation and AI. And all of that has a huge nexus with the manufacturing space. And so I think manufacturers can expect that there is going to be more regulation in their space or more interest in regulation from the government. And it is going to be more important than ever before that manufacturers are engaging with their government, communicating with their government about how policies that both parties are considering will impact them and will impact the future of the manufacturing industry and impact the U.S. manufacturing industry's competitiveness. So I think they can look for more action and also more opportunity to shape that action.
It's interesting that you say that when you survey members, and I think as a whole, when you look at things, I always have this argument with our leadership within Precision Metal Forming Association is we always have this discussion of who we represent. And I often say that when we talk about it, we talk about our members, but that's really not true because we represent everybody in the metal forming and fabricating industry. Whether they know it, whether they value it, whether they are accepting of it or not, we represent them. Because, and the reason I say that is going back to when we had the steel tariffs, and that's when I first got involved in the advocacy side of it, was when at that time we had these steel tariffs and companies were telling me, I have to make a decision, not whether or not I'm going to buy a piece of equipment. I have to make a decision whether I'm going to continue to manufacture in the US. That's a huge deal for people. And the only voice that we had at that time was PMA and the advocacy group through Bracewell. And it was an incredible eye-opening experience to realize that who's our voice? Who is going out and talking on our behalf of these challenges of companies trying to make decisions on their future?
Yeah.
And that's an important part. I think it's undervalued or underappreciated as a whole within our industry. So,
yeah, and of course, PMA and One Voice continue to be very active in the tariff space, and impacting, other trade policies as well that impact manufacturers. So you're absolutely right that, a rising tide lifts all the boats. So if PMA is an effective advocate, certainly other small and medium-sized businesses stand to benefit from the advocacy done by this organization. My colleagues, both at Bracewell and at the Franklin Partnership, are really not only issue experts with the small and medium-sized manufacturing space, but they're also experts on important policies that impact those folks. So we are out talking with members of the legislature. We're also out talking with members of federal agencies, and saying, hey, this is how these policies impact this sector of the economy. Another place that you can see it too is in working with members to participate in media stories and to say, hey, let's talk about how this policy that is getting a lot of conversation in the Wall Street Journal, for example, is impacting your decisions on the ground every day. Because to your point, it's not some far off decision being made. It has real implications for manufacturers who are saying, this is going to shape my decisions in whether I'm going to be able to continue business here, and certainly in the investments I can make to advance the type of work that I could do. That we definitely hear people making those decisions all the time.
One other thing that I've found working with local legislators, I've found in the past that they sometimes are unaware of how certain things have an influence on other things in certain industries. For instance, there was a company that was closing here in Jackson, Tennessee. At the time when that company was closing, I was speaking with one of the local representatives, and they said that, well, that's outside of my area. As true as that is, companies that supply parts to that plant are in your area. And sometimes it takes communications like your group provides to help illustrate those points, because they don't always understand that. When you mention automotive to them, a lot of times they hear Ford, GM. That's in their mind what they're hearing. They're not hearing the 600, 700 plus companies that are supplying parts to the
that are suppliers that are making parts of parts. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big learning curve. And as much interest as you see from policymakers in manufacturing, you don't always see a total understanding of how the supply chain works and how many people are working in the space who are maybe not at the household name companies, that there are all these other companies who are supplying those household names and who are also employed in the sector and doing the work that ends up making those goods and products that people have in their homes every day. I've worked with PMA and with the manufacturing sector for more than a decade, and I remember early on realizing that for the first time, that you're not making every single part that is going into a car inside one facility. Instead, those parts are being made in hundreds of facilities and then being brought together into this final product. And I think that part, absolutely, there is a learning curve there. And I think that's part of our role, is explaining how all of these different businesses work, who is doing what and where, what parts of that work can be done in the US. And of course, we see a significant amount of reshoring in recent years, which I think is important for policymakers to understand. And then also, you know, the piece about knowing how a policy impacts small businesses who are important in the overall manufacturing industry supply chain and are important as an engine of the US economy and US competitiveness in the manufacturing space. So I think all of those are pieces that are important to get out. PMA does that extraordinarily well because so many of PMA's members are in that small and medium manufacturing space. Not to say that they don't have big member companies, because of course they do, but really putting out those small and medium-sized manufacturers, I think, is something that PMA does very well. David Klotz, who I know you know well, is forever, it seems, on the road, going out to visit manufacturers, you know, showcasing what they do. A quick scroll through his LinkedIn will take you on a nationwide tour of different facilities. So I think they do a good job of telling that story, and it's our role to amplify that in the policy space specifically.
I agree. Now, you had mentioned earlier that one of the other areas that's important is you see as workforce development.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you see, what is the role of advocacy to help support those? Is that more in the policy side, do you think? Is that something we can be more impactful
So
in?
it's twofold, really. You know, I think there's definitely a policy component, and that is in working with at the federal level and at the state level to ensure that there are sufficient programs to support students who would have an interest in manufacturing, to access the right kind of training programs and resource development programs to make that possible for them, make that pathway possible for them. Folks who are leading manufacturing facilities today already know that the face of the workforce is changing. By 2025, we're going to have like almost 30% of the workforce in the United States is going to be Gen Zs. So that's going to be young people who were born in the late 1990s to the early 2000s. That is meaningful because we are talking about people who have different interests, different values, maybe than previous generations have had in the workforce. We know that this will be the first fully digitally native generation entering the workforce. So that is meaningful from a policy perspective, because we want to make sure that those students have a reasonable and accessible pipeline to the manufacturing space. It's also really important from a messaging perspective, because we have to be able to reach people and say that this is a career path that they should and could be interested in. I think your listeners will be pleased to hear there are some studies indicating that there is growing interest in the manufacturing sector as a career path. So there's a great new research out from a group called Parsable. They study Gen Z. They study lots of things, but they have a study on Gen Z recently, and it says 83% of recently graduated 18 to 24-year-olds who are part of that Gen Z cohort view manufacturing as high-tech and modern. Now, that is not always true. Even in the decade I've been doing this, not every generation has seen the industry that way. So I think that's a real breakthrough, and it's a real testimony to organizations like PMA who have been out there talking about what a modern manufacturing facility looks like, how the work that they're doing fits within the context of world-changing things, you know, modern technology, fits within the kinds of products that people want to be associated with, want to be working on, how manufacturers are shaping things like climate change, shaping things like, you know, modern advancement and new technology. So I really think that's the part that speaks to this next generation, and that's the part that we have to marry together. Now, the issue is, the downside of that report is that nearly half of the respondents did not, or actually more than half of the respondents did not have access to a manufacturing focused program at school. So they see it as cool and high tech, They say that it's important, they demonstrate an interest into it, but they can't always access it. And so without that, there's going to be a gap between, where people who might have pursued it as a path can't necessarily get there. So I think that's where the policy piece comes in. And we work on that together, both, from a messaging perspective and a policy perspective.
Well, and I think that's one of those areas where we as members and being part of PMA, it's important for us to be active in the local communities, be active with the local schools.
No doubt.
Our Tennessee district is very active with like the TCATs, which are the local Tennessee College of Applied Technology. We donate equipment and things like that to help them get people ready for tool and die, or getting them ready for operating on presses. Those kinds of things are really critical for getting that messaging out. And I think also people within our manufacturing sometimes have this idea that, well, I'm offering them a job. No, you can't just say I'm offering them a job. You better have a better message than that. Why is it important? Why is it important to be here? And I talk about that with our own company. I work for Link Systems on my day job, and the importance of what we do, our why. Understand your why. Well, why do we do it? Because we save people's lives. That's important. The safety component of what we do is we save people's lives. We're impactful in automation and automating this equipment. That's critical to the success in keeping manufacturing in the U.S. because the rise of China in a worldwide global economy has been through manufacturing, not through war or other things. It's been through manufacturing. I mean, they are a huge exporter of goods because we chose to not. It was cheaper to do it that way. So yeah, and that's.
No, I mean, I think you're thinking about it completely the right way, and it's consistent with what the research shows. I mean, I'll say PMA from a district perspective. You mentioned your own district, just does a ton to get the word out about opportunity. The PMA through the Educational Foundation runs a scholarship program where districts offer scholarships to young people to pursue education in manufacturing. This year, they had record number of applicants, which of course translates into real opportunity, real money going out the door for people to pursue manufacturing. And I think I said young people, but it's not all young people, right? It's all kinds of people making career transition into manufacturing because they recognize opportunity there. And so I think that on the one hand, that's a really important element. And it's something that I know PMA is so committed to, is to, really making this pipeline of careers accessible to people and reaching people where they are and trying to make that possible. The other piece of what you're saying is like the why, communicating the why. That's so important. I think it's always been important, but we know now, especially with, I'm a member of the millennial generation, and the why was really important to us too. But we know that with our younger peers, it's just vital for them to understand how these jobs connect to the issues that they really care about. And we know that the kinds of issues that they care about are the problems that plague our globe, right? They're concerned about climate change. They're concerned about economic stability and global stability. These are the kinds of things that they are worried about. And so I think, and with good reason, I mean, thankfully, like, the future is good, in good hands when we have young people who are concerned about those issues. And I think it is more important than ever that we communicate. If manufacturers want to recruit that talent and retain that talent, it's important that they connect the types of jobs offered in the sector to the issues that young people want to be impacting. And it has the benefit of being true. These jobs really do, you have manufacturers who are putting pieces together that are ultimately going to be part of renewable energy structures, are going to be part of smart grid technology, are going to be part of, the next wave of vehicles. All of the types of changes that we see coming that are important, I think, to the next generation and important to all of us. So
Absolutely. Now, how do we go about utilizing things like AI,
mm,
do you feel, in manufacturing, not just from the standpoint of how it benefits us, because of course there's a huge benefit component to that, but how does that also work to translate to attracting the best and brightest of our future?
so I mean, that is obviously the question that we're all wrestling with. I think the rise of AI impacts every industry. I would argue that manufacturers are better positioned than many other industries to embrace AI in a productive way and use it to foster and grow the next generation of talent. So, I mean, we've already talked about the fact that Gen Zs are digital natives. They expect a high-tech connected workplace. And I think they are more interested in and more capable with integrating AI into their work, maybe even than previous generations would, just in an organic way. I think it can be very comfortable to them, and I think that makes sense. So, I was probably, gosh, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was working with a company that was doing a voice integrated technology for manufacturing, and at the time, when they were talking about it, it was still, completely a revolutionary concept, and now you see widespread adoption of technologies like that. Manufacturers have been incorporating robots onto assembly lines for years and years. You were seeing those kinds of displays even a decade ago when I was going to Fab Tech for the first time. So I think that manufacturers have a comfort with the inclusion of automation technology in a way that maybe other industries will have to get more of a running jump on, and manufacturers are already prepared to accept that and do it well. I think that just like anything, the people who adopt it early are going to have a competitive advantage. I think, and this is my own opinion, but I think I'm inclined to believe the AI experts who are not predicting the demise of the human workforce, but are instead predicting a cooperation between the human workforce and artificial intelligence. I think there, of course, anytime we are incorporating new technology, there are real and valid concerns about what it does to the workforce. But I think as the manufacturing industry has seen, as it has incorporated technology throughout its history, that these kinds of technologies can be an enabler for a robust human workforce and an element that can empower manufacturers to continue to be as innovative and as forward-looking as they have been historically.
And I think you bring up a great point there too about how do we are we positioned in the right place? And I do believe we are, because without question, we've been using a lot of the tools. We've been using IoT for a lot of years. People think that, well, this is a new thing. We've been gathering data for years. We do have that advantage. We already have sensors in a lot of places in our stamping industry and things like that. So we've been doing that. Now we need to leverage it to action. Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the driving factors. Well, we're just about out of time, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been tremendous. I wanted to thank you for being here because you bring a idea of what can be, as far as advocacy and working with our policy producers, that we need to understand better for our own good and for our future, to understand what's going on in Washington and how we can better educate them so that they understand what we do better.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing. I think that Washington is with manufacturers in a way that manufacturers should feel very reassured by. We hear everybody on both sides of the aisle talking about wanting to strengthen US manufacturing, wanting to make US manufacturing competitive, wanting to be a global leader in manufacturing. I think that we see that almost in an unprecedented way. Certainly in the time that I've been working on this, that there are very few places where there is bipartisan support. US manufacturing is a place where there is bipartisan support. And I think it is absolutely important that manufacturers know that and are willing to engage with government on these really important frontier issues like workforce, like integration of automation, because I think that there is real opportunity to continue to grow and thrive and keep the industry strong with the support of policymakers.
Great. This is our one voice, of course, we partner with the NTMA on. And of course, that's what leads us to our group here with Bracewell LLP. And of course, thank you so much today for being here, Caitlin. Everybody out there, make it a great day.